All right, welcome, listeners, one and all, to the first ever Chronicles of Demeron podcast. Where I apologize in advance for how weird and crazy and trash this is going to be because we don't know what we're doing, but it's going to be fun, you know. So a little bit of background: me and a bunch of my friends, we play D&D on the regular, and we thought it'd be fun to share our world with other people. So that's what the point of this podcast is, to give people information about our world and things like that. Yeah. So my name is Chris. I am the dungeon master for this group. And just one other thing I want to preface with this world is I use Exandria, and I just have my extra thing as my version of Exandria, which if you read in the first couple in the first section of the Tal'Dorei guide or the Wildmount guide, that Matt Mercer says that my version of Exandria is correct in my world, even if Matt Mercer's sitting at my table. So if you have any issues with that, bring it up with Matt, not me. Yeah. So today, I am joined by my friend Ethan.
Hello, I'm Ethan. I play Malik Villadin, a gunslinger.
Yeah, and he's here. We're going to talk about the kind of the history of Exandria, and more specifically Demeron, in this episode. So, we're going to go ahead and roll right into that. So, a brief overview of the history of Exandria as a whole. There was the founding, which was the time before the founding was just the element, like the chaos of the four elements, and just nothing. And then the gods came in when they saw beauty in this chaos and decided to, or potential in this chaos, and decided to form it together into something conformed, which is Exandria as we know it. But there were a couple beings called the Titans, which were, or the Primordials, which were be part of the chaos, which wanted to leave it as the elemental chaos. And so they rose up to try to defeat the creations of the gods, which were elves, men, and dwarves. And so the gods blessed the elves, humans, and dwarves with the first arcane magics and divine magics and natural magics, which were used to combat the Primordials, which they fended them off. After which there was a time called the Age of Arcanum, where magic was flourishing. There was really no limits on magic, so there were ridiculous things happening in terms of magic. It's even when the person who was the Raven Queen, who was once a human, ascended to godhood, killing the previous god of death, using magic. So magic was kind of flourishing throughout that time. And right near the end of that period, a group of people began to think, hey, what if we, with all this magic power, what if we became the gods? Which didn't make the gods happy. And some of the gods who were now known as the betrayer gods said, we don't like this, we're just gonna wipe them all out and start all over again. And the prime deities were like, no, we need to correct them, but we still care for them. And so they decided to, and those two groups came into an argument with each other, with the primarily humans, but the races caught in the middle, and there was a massive war called the Calamity. And from the Calamity, as the Calamity came to an end, it caused mass destruction, first off, across the entirety of Exandria. But how it ended was the gods eventually sealed, or defeated the betrayer gods and sealed them away with the divine gate, which prevented both prime deities and betrayer gods from entering onto the material plane. And that's the general history of Exandria. And it brings us more specifically now to where Demeron. So before the Calamity and things like that, Demeron was just a group, or like a place, and there were a bunch of small nomadic groups that didn't really have much of a society. Maybe the elves did, like wood elves have a hometown called, I'm pretty sure it's a Pest, was the ancient birthplace of the wood elves. But otherwise there was lots of nomadic tribes wandering around. And then the Calamity hit, and it didn't affect Demeron as much as it did the other continents. There was no actual fighting on Demeron itself. Most of that happened in Wildmount. But due to many of the divine energies that were unleashed upon Exandria, and how those affected the weave, some random individuals were imbued with large amounts of divine power. And after the calamity, these individuals rose up and tried to assert dominance over Demeron, claiming themselves as the rulers. Others tried to then stop the people trying to assert dominance, which caused almost a mini calamity, like a war, which lasted for 20 years, and with no really progress gained one way or the other. When an individual by the name of Brindom found and created a weapon called the Godslayer. It was a golden longsword, and he used the weapon to defeat most of the demigod-like individuals, and make him the strongest being in Demeron. Afterward, he split the blade into 5 parts, and then hid them, so that he wouldn't be killed. And then, having powers over the sea, he rose the waters up to the top where only the mountains were basically visible. He then helped people kind of build places to live, but then removed himself from society and let the rest of Demeron govern itself. This time period is called the Rising, which lasted for about 795 years. After which, or during the Rising, there was a group of individuals who just were interested in getting treasure, but eventually got caught up in a plot to kill Brindom. And eventually, after a long fight, the killing blow was dealt by Amon using the Godslayer sword. And using the ancient relic, he took the powers of Brindom away, and then turned onto the party, being corrupt with power, and defeated them, either killing or forcing them to flee. Afterward, he systematically took over Demeron, asserting himself as the new ruler of Demeron. And with his the favor gained of the people and the charisma, because he did help people. So with his charisma and the attention he gave to the people, they put him in charge of the actual place he was kind of liked, and it was pretty easy for him. This time period was called the Conquest, which lasted for about 20 years. At the end of the Conquest, and the occupation that is categorized under that time period, there was a group of heroes known as the Nefarious Valors. They were a subsect of the Resistance, who didn't like Amon because he was kind of evil. And so this Nefarious Valors, they attacked and killed Amon. However, unknown to them, there was a ritual being performed by a group of clerics underneath Amon's palace that was completed shortly after Amon was killed. The ritual broke a section of the Divine Gate, letting some of the Betrayer gods into Demeron. Asmodeus sat on the throne of Chiron. Lolth went underground to take over the Underdark. Bane went to the south end of Tal'Dorei and claimed the Hobgoblin Empire for his own. And Tiamat went to Amon and claimed it as her own, taking after her child Thordak. The Nefarious Valors eventually defeated the 4 gods, either banishing or destroying them, and they set up a democratic council to rule Demeron. And for the first time, it wasn't one person, nor was anyone evil at that time that was ruling Demeron. And it ended the calamity and starting an age of prosperity that has lasted for over 100 years into this point, where we're at in our campaign now. So that's kind of the brief history of Demeron. Hopefully that was informative. Now, Ethan has some questions for me, which I will answer. So, Ethan, take it away.
Yeah, so I guess a great starting question would be, how did Demeron get its name?
So, in the lore, Brindom came up with the name. No one really knows why, but it was the place, it was what he called the place, and it just became the nation of Demeron, and the name has just stuck around. The real life version is, I was at the time when I was building the world, it was a massive ocean basically, and I was looking up ocean name generator, and I found Demeron, and I thought, hey, that sounds like a cool name, so I used it as my ocean, and then changed it into the name, and it's just kind of stuck around, and I liked it. So yeah.
Okay. So, since we're talking about Brindom, then what was it like living in the time that he was in charge? How has it changed to now?
So, the life varies on where you were located, right? Some of the places had more nice governments that were kind of keen to people. Some had governments that didn't really care. Because Brindom basically just ruled his throne or his palace in that kind of area. Otherwise, he didn't really care about the rest of Demeron. It was quite varied across the ocean and depending on the island that you were. So, but in general, life was tight for most commoners.
Yeah. And then near the beginning with all the tribes, how did the civilization or like society first begin to start like boom and actually start becoming bigger?
So, kind of first organized Demeron was when Brindam kind of helped the different tribes that survived after the waters rose. We kind of put them together and helped them, so they kind of that was kind of there were small pockets of like I guess culture almost. I don't necessarily society. But they were different groups of like-minded people. And then after Amon took out Brindam and the waters came down, the people started to come down the mountains and intermingle and see kind of there were more than just them. And that's where the first elements of society began. Is there's towns and cities started to pop up. And there were um, like yeah, lots of and intermingling and trade began to begin, and now we have, and that kind of was the first part of society, which has just evolved to where we are at today.
Kind of the same question about Brindam for Amon was what was it like when he was in charge? Did he follow in Brindam's footsteps, or was there anything that he changed? And if so, like how did it change Demeron?
So one major thing is he at least pretended to put in effort into caring about his people. He understood that even as an evil ruler, like you need people to rule to have a kingdom, and so he did put some effort into keeping people semi-happy.
Yeah.
And so he was um, much nicer like that, as well as but there were a lot more restrictions on things you could do, things you could trade, where you could go, things like that. And there was also a very specific. There was a ban on magic unless you had a specific permit. Kind of to quell resistances and stuff like that. So it was something like that.
Okay. Where Demeron is now, is there like Brindam and Amon? Is there one person in charge, or is it like a group?
So in charge now actually is the Chamber of Demeron, which are a ruling council of 8. Each of the members is elected from one of the 8 regions in their of Demeron, 8 provinces, and are sent to represent that province. And each person has a specialty on the council, and they're all equal. And then below them would be the governors of each of the provinces, and the governors have uh, like advisors, but they have kind of supreme authority over that province. But if they do try to abuse that power, then the members of the Chamber of Demeron can kind of kick them out.
Okay. How has governing worked for each province, and how do they connect with each other and develop between each province?
So governing, it's as I said before, there's a governor and they have a council of advisors, but they make the executive decisions, right? And so when it comes to minor decisions, they have like people they've appointed to like deal with like little penny, like little stealing or whatever. And then when more majors like a murder or like a mass crime or things like that, then it's brought to the governor, and they kind of deal with that. But when it comes to like major issues, they usually send them up the chain to the Chamber of Demeron. Otherwise, yeah, governing is like the governor hands out the orders issued by the Chamber of Demeron and kind of makes individual orders based on smaller needs as need be. And then the provinces themselves, like some of the people may have more like dislike for other people, but as a whole, the provinces are still all united under the single banner of Demeron, and so are fairly friendly.
Yeah, so then what caused them to split into provinces? And was there ever a time where Demeron was just one big island?
So during the time of Amon, uh, he was he realized that it's a lot harder to try to manage the massive land of Demeron by himself, and so he kind of just dictated provinces. He kind of grouped them together by different like what they produced, so or what their interests were. So on the far west side, there's the province of Hinia, which was known for primarily like fish exportation, as well as like a popular destination place for rich nobles. And so we kind of grouped those places together. And then on the north, there was a lot more like mining towns and things like that. And so he kind of grouped those into smaller provinces. And in the south, there was lots of farming. So he grouped those into different provinces. And there, so he kind of grouped them together by like what the cities and towns were known for. And there was, of course, exceptions to that. Like the city of Corpike would be a mining town, but it exists in Feld, which is primarily a farming province. And so yeah, he kind of dictated those, but they're not like individual provinces that are against each other. They're all just they're still Demeron as a whole. They just are separated so that it's easier for the person in charge, in that case Amon, and now in this case the Chamber of Demeron, to manage.
All right. So, since I'm kind of on the topic about connections and relationships, what's the relationship between all the races in Demeron? And if any, are there any races that don't fit into that relationship that other races have?
So the primary races in Demeron would be elves and humans and dwarves. Halflings follow closely behind. And generally speaking, they get along just fine. Other races that are common in Demeron would be half-elves, gnomes, dragonborn, half-orcs, and tieflings. And they're not looked down upon really at all either. They're the common races. The elves do kind of think themselves above everybody else, and so they're slightly more full of themselves than the rest of the races are. But those are only very specific individuals, and generally speaking, the elves don't mind the rest of the races. So yeah, as a whole, it's those kind of races, and they're fairly all on equal footing.
Okay. So then, for the second calamity, has the second calamity changed anything in any way? Towns, cities, the natural environment, daily living, especially the areas that the betrayed gods were.
So in terms of like just natural living, the living and the way people like go about their lives, they're just kind of aware of it, right? They're aware that there was a second calamity and that potentially speaking things could come up again. But at the same time, it did also affect some of the way that the laws are put together, right? And there's a group called the White Lotus, which we'll do a whole other episode on because they're interesting. Briefly, their goal, their primary objective is to prevent any major threats, like extraplanar threats coming to attack Demeron again. And so that's what they're in charge of. And so they kind of manage that, and that does affect some areas of Demeron more than others. As well, natural environment. Outside of Curon, there are a couple places still that are affected by Asmodeus, basically claiming that area as an extra layer of his 9 hells. And there's a couple places, most of it's recovered, but there's a couple places that are still a little damaged by that. And then over in Destria, there's still Lolth's massive spire that had collapsed. It is there still, and kind of integrated into Elven society, both as a reminder of the darkest day as well as to turn something negative into a positive thing.
Okay. So since we're on the topic about gods and whatever, prayer gods, how does the religion connect with Demeron? And is there any specific gods Demeron believes in?
Demeron wasn't really aware of the deities until they began to expand outwards, and started to communicate with Isilra and Marquette and Taldore. But when they started to communicate with these groups of people, they found out about the deities that are in the pantheon of Exandria, and they kind of opened up worship to all the prime deities for the people of Demeron. But they're kind of free that way. If there was a patron saint or a primary patron of Demeron, it would be Ayun, because she is the goddess of arcane magic, and Demeron is kind of known for being the most magical place on Exandria. But otherwise there's lots of free worship across all the places. So
Okay. So then, are there any like religious or sacred events that go around the year in Demeron?
so the more standard Exandrian holidays, like the Day of Challenging, which is dedicated to Cord, or the Harvest Festival, which is dedicated to Melora. There's those, as well as Winter's Crest, which are just more standard Exandrian holidays. But there are a few specific Demeranian holidays. One notable one would be the Festival of the Arcane, which was it was on the last day that Curon, or which was the day that Curon was officially rebuilt. The last thing was fixed on Curon after the Second Calamity, and thanks to all the mages and arcanists who helped out building the city, it was called the Festival of the Arcane, as a way of thanking, to kind of everyone has a day to spend thanking enjoying magic and thanking the arcanists who helped build this city. And so yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then, I just have one more question, and that is, what are some great wonders and monuments in Demeron that make it stand out from the other continents, like Lulth's Tower?
So yeah, Lulth's Tower was there. The city of Curon itself is quite a specter to see. There's a lot of mage towers in one area. The Tarsington Citadel is rather beautiful. A couple strange wonders. There's a city, called Hymos, that has a mysterious obelisk that no one really knows, and kind of some research has gone to look at it more often or more recently. But a couple strange wonders like that. But I guess the primary wonder of, like, the almost the crown jewel of Demeron, Curon is very important, but the crown jewel would be the city of Arcanus. Is just the most beautiful place in Demeron. One of the most beautiful places in Exandria. Just filled with mage towers and white buildings, and the massive Memoria Academy, which is just adorned with gold and marble. So those are some of the more wonderful places to visit, but there's lots of great attractions across all of Demeron.
Okay. Well, yeah, with that, I would like to thank you for answering my questions, and
Yeah.
then, yeah, that's it.
All right. Well, thank you, Ethan, for bringing that on. That helps. Hopefully, that helps the listeners get some insight into the history and Demeron as a whole. So, thank you, Ethan, for joining me.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you very much for listening, if you are listening to this. And hopefully, we'll be back with another episode.
Hey, this is Chris. Just wanted to do an extra outro. I wanted to thank you for listening to our podcast. And hopefully we'll have a next episode out soon. So until then, goodbye.